legitimate request for documents from Congress, and I'm sure you agree. And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. And I'm going to try something a little different here. I'm going to let you get a complete sentence out in response to a question so we can hopefully elicit some information. But first of all, the document request, the first document request that this committee sent out was on November 18th. The committee was formed in May. So, sorry, my math's a little off here between May and November. That's 5 or 6 months before the committee made a document request. Now, the chairman would have everybody believe that they've been begging for documents from day one and you've been stonewalling them, and that's the only reason we can't proceed. But fact number one is, from May to November, there were no document requests from this committee, okay? If we're not interested in dragging it out, that just boggles the mind that you wouldn't make a document request. Now, putting aside for the moment that there have been 9 separate investigations, and gosh, I don't even know if anyone could count up the number of document requests that you have received from those 9 separate investigations or the number of documents that you have in fact provided. But the reason Democrats in this committee are concerned about the so-called glacial pace is that's a long time to wait for a document request if you're in a big hurry. The second interesting thing about the little back and forth right there is, as near as I could tell, and it was hard because you were being cut off so constantly, you have not said no to any request to interview a witness. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So let's just be clear about this. This stonewalling effort that the chairman just described includes a situation where you have never said no to an interview request. And the interview requests have been relatively slow in coming. So maybe we will get to the point where you do say no. You were making the legal point, and I'm ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, and we've been through this with investigations before, where the Justice Department always gets a little queasy when somebody else wants to interview a witness. As a former prosecutor, I know Mr. Gowdy would have felt the same way if someone had come in and said, hey, can I talk to your witness? You always get a little nervous about it, but it doesn't mean that you don't do it. And I just want the record to be very, very clear here. The State Department has not said no. Now, if we get to the point where they do, then we can have a conversation about it. So that whole little back and forth to sort of create the illusion that the reason the committee is moving so slowly is because of your unwillingness is very unfair to you and very unfair to the State Department. There may come a time in this committee's investigation when you are being uncooperative, and then we can have that conversation. We ain't there yet. And these are the issues that Mr. Cummings raised that gives us a concern. Why was this committee formed in the first place? Now, one of the things that I really want to make clear for Mr. Gowdy is he's never going to get every single question answered, and he's never going to get every single document. I've been a legislator for 24 years, prosecutor for a little bit of time. I have not yet encountered the event in human history where every question gets answered. It's frustrating, it's irritating, because part of it is if you interview all 6 of those witnesses, you get 6 different stories, and then you can't figure out how to reconcile them. We are not going to get every single question answered, and to lay that promise out to the families involved, the people whose lives were destroyed by this, that somehow we're going to answer every question when no other investigative committee in the history of the world has ever been able to answer every question, I think is unfair. That's not what we're doing. We have 9 separate investigations that have been done. So what the Democrats are concerned about on this committee is whether or not this committee has a clear purpose, okay? Or is that purpose purely political and partisan? Because the other thing that I'm readily going to admit is that Benghazi was an awful incident in our nation's history. And the people who are in charge when it happened, you know, they've got to feel very, very bad about it happening. It is the nature of being the president that bad things happen on your watch. When George W. Bush was president, 9/11 happened. When Bill Clinton was president, Somalia, among other things, happened. 18 dead Americans. When Ronald Reagan was president, we had 2 suicide bombings in Beirut. Jimmy Carter went through the Iran hostage crisis. There is no question that Benghazi is a bad, bad incident in the Obama administration. It has always been my suspicion that the purpose of this is to focus on that bad incident as much as possible for partisan and political reasons. Now, we gave them the benefit of the doubt. Said, okay, let's see. Formed in May, no document request until November 18th. We're in January. We don't have a vote on the rules. You know, we get occasionally a loose timeline for the interview that seems to want to drag it out as close to 2016 as possible. Look, if we want to do honor to these families, then let's do a realistic investigation. And then we have the final fact. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, it is not just people that you ran into on an airplane and didn't tell us. There were specific witnesses that were interviewed by the Republican majority, and they didn't tell Democrats. And in a couple of instances, those witnesses contradicted the information that the majority was seeking. Again, information not provided to us. Now, I serve as the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, and Buck McKeon and I, when he was chair, and now Mr. Thornberry and I, we've had our disagreements. But I'll tell you, there's never been anything like that, where, you know, evidence on the other side we just sort of exclude from the minority party. All of those facts add up to this being a partisan and political investigation. Now, if we want to change that and actually start trying to work together, that would be wonderful. But as our ranking member pointed out, after we raised these issues of interviewing witnesses and not telling Democrats, not only wasn't it changed, you're attempting to write it into the rules of the committee that that would be permissible. So that is our concern. The slow pace of this, again, we started in May. We had our first document request in November, interviewing witnesses without including Democrats. All of this points to a goal and objective of this committee that doesn't have much to do with finding out the truth and doesn't have much to do with preventing future attacks. Now, I hope we get better than that, but I got to tell you, what I just witnessed between the chairman and Mr. Rubin here, you know, trying to make it look like they're being stonewalled when they're not, hardly encourages me. And again, I'll just conclude by emphasizing the fact that Mr. Rubin pointed out, they have not said no to interviewing a witness. And I agree with Mr. Gowdy. As members of Congress, we're constantly bumping heads against one administration or another. We want to interview every witness. And when we get to the point where you do say no, well, then maybe we'll have an argument. But you haven't said no. The documents you're trying to generate, the document request, as I understand it, included a request for 2 years worth of information from about, I don't know, 14 different people all around Libya. And in the era of emails and texts and everything else, that's a heck of a lot of information to find, and good luck finding it. And I see no evidence that either of these gentlemen are not trying their best to find it and provide it for us. I don't know if you're going to find everything, but it is clear that there is no stonewalling effort here, that the reason that we've moved so slow is because of the decisions made by the committee. Now again, and you know, I tend to be a little bit more impatient than our ranking member. That's why he's got the top job. He's better at it. You know, for me, about a week ago when I learned about all this stuff, it was, you know, time to say, hey, what's the point? What are we doing here? But Mr. Cummings is a patient and thorough man, and if the committee will now begin to include us in these things, stop accusing the State Department of stonewalling when they're not, and pick up the pace a little bit, I guess it is still possible this committee could serve the purpose that it stated. And yes, we have all read what the Republican majority voted for in creating this commission. They want everything. And, you know, it's going to take time to get everything, I would imagine. But the mere fact that the House of Representatives, controlled by the Republicans, voted for this doesn't change the possibility that it is more of a partisan political investigation than a legitimate effort to find the truth. So I hope some of those things change. And number one, the top of the list, and I'll just close with this, it's got to be bipartisan. You can't be interviewing witnesses, particularly when we come to find out that some of those witnesses who were interviewed were being interviewed to attempt to establish, you know, a line of, well, you know, an argument, and it turned out that that witness directly contradicted that line of argument, and then you don't tell the other side. And Mr. Gowdy's pointed out he's a prosecutor. You do that in open court? You get a piece of information like that and you don't provide it to the other side? As a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, you go to jail, all right? Because that is a violation of the laws of the court. I would hope that Congress would at least live up to that. So I sincerely hope that we do better. I look forward to the documents. I don't envy you your job. There's so many documents in the world, but I hope you will provide them, and I hope you will, provide what this committee asks for when they get around to asking for it. I yield back.
Chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
Well, Mr. Rubin, I hope you thank Mr. Smith after the hearing for giving you a little bit of a break. I'm going to ask you a series of questions now to follow up with the chairman.